I felt like I'd climbed to the top of the mountain and there was nothing to see. And I had this just deep, like, depression set in. I had a big firm. I had 40 people working for me. Anybody, no matter how fortunate they look on the surface, can be struggling deeply on the inside. So what was so surprising to me was I was this pillar of health 2 years earlier, and now I'm literally dying 2 years later and going blind, and no one can explain what's happening to me. I started doing this whole protocol that I had come up with myself, and I started noticing that my vision was a little bit better. And I thought, maybe this is working. What I call our maps of reality, the way we think like the world works, is wrong. We have lost touch with where we come from. We have lost touch with how we are connected to Mother Earth and how we are connected to nature. We have lost touch with God and spirituality, and we have thought through materialistic science that we are now our own gods. If you acknowledge that life is this beautiful creation and that what we have in Mother Earth is indescribably incredible and amazing, and you realize that there's something bigger than us and that we have a duty to protect what we've come from, it's much easier to do this.
Hi, this is JP Newman on Investing on Purpose, and today you are going to meet Jason Karp, CEO of HumanCo Brands. Oh my God, I think this might be my favorite episode, if not one of my absolute most inspirational episodes. Jason is a close friend, and I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of years ago at TED. And Jason, his story is just unbelievable and how he's changing the world. For those of you who don't know Jason, if you looked at last week, there was a very big testimonial in front of the US Senate about how American brands are poisoning our food system and our children, and we're actually in a major health crisis. And you probably know a lot of the politicians are talking about this right now as one of the biggest health problems and epidemics in America right now. Well, Jason was testifying behind Congress, and he is passionate about this. And Jason's story essentially was, what you're going to hear on the episode is, how did he go from being a Wall Street titan he had founded by 30, a $4 billion company, and then went through one of the worst health scares you can imagine, which you're going to hear in this episode. So debilitating that he went on an entirely different health journey, which led to the end of his hedge fund and onto a whole new adventure on a 9-figure food company, which you guys will all know more about. I'll save the details for the episode. I think most importantly, and Jason's now taken that second success and actually third success, and now he's using all that energy to see if we can't upgrade our food system. It is a shame what we're doing to our children in our schools and our cafeterias. We're literally having big brands in America use poisonous things that they won't even allow in other countries. So other countries have the same American brands with healthier versions. And Jason's basically set and determined for the world to use the power of money, commerce, passion, and just ultimately doing the right thing to change literally the way we handle food in America. You are going to love him for his heart, his brains, and just his one-of-a-kind attitude. Enjoy the episode. Hi, this is JP Newman on Investing on Purpose, and today I'm so excited to have a dear friend and brilliant thinker who's changing the food industry with me, Jason Karp. And Jason, it's taken a while to actually, with your schedule and my schedule, to actually get us together to be able to do this. But I appreciate you came. And this is a conversation I've been wanting to have with you for a long time, quite frankly. So I'm super excited. In all the shows that I've done, I've never had a guest that has been able to really be, it's one thing to actually kill it in one industry with like a 9-figure exit in one industry, but then to do that, have a life experience that rocks your world and transform that life experience that would have taken most people down into a second industry that you're disrupting right now with another 9 figures behind that. Like, who does that? That's so unique. And what was really interesting to me about how you did it was some people who get lucky enough, like the Elon Musk, and there's just certain people who can create companies, and they're just good at creating companies because they know the structure of companies. But I see that you lead so much from your passion and your heart and your why. But then it's like you take your skills, all those skills you've learned from childhood, from your life in New York, which we're going to get into, and you create these frameworks. And from those frameworks, you're able to create success. But their foundation is coming from passion to really help people. And that just blows me away. And it's one of the reasons why I love you as a friend, have so much respect for you. And so to have this conversation is just just great.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to start just because no one really knows about you. Like, tell us your story a little bit from college. Obviously, number one, if I remember, squash. Weren't you the number one athlete in your college in squash? If I remember.
I was the number one student athlete. So
okay,
yeah.
And if I remember, you graduated number 3 from business school at Wharton.
Yep.
So and that's pretty amazing going from a kid, from what I understand from your story, and tell me, like, you were killing it, but that wasn't necessarily how you grew up. That was something that you that you basically became transformed. I think you gave it a name.
Yeah.
What did you call it when you became kind of Super Jason?
Well, it was very valuable in certain ways. But it was very destructive in other ways. I called him Terminator Jason.
Terminator Jason, that's what it was. Yeah.
That was a name that we coined in my therapy.
Wow.
I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, middle class, and I had undiagnosed but very pronounced ADHD. I had a really hard time sitting still. I had a really hard time focusing. I had a really hard time reading. I think now looking back and now having 2 children that are, one is 15 and one is 11. Looking back, I think I also had several learning disabilities growing up that were undiagnosed. I barely could read a book. And I kind of got by with just a lot of shortcuts. And I developed just a tremendous amount of insecurity, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration for feeling different, being told, things about what my potential is, but not being able to live up to it. It was in a time also, this was in the 80s and the 90s, thankfully before cell phones and before the internet. I was always a very introspective kid. I always would spend a lot of time reflecting, thinking, and...
But do you have brothers and sisters?
I have an older sister.
Okay, so you were the young one.
Yeah.
How many years apart?
4.5 years apart.
So you really weren't, were you close or kind of in your own little...
No, I mean, we were close enough, but she was... we missed each other in high school.
I was going to say, you
she was a freshman in college when I was a freshman in high school.
So you're going through this experience of being introspective. You're all together as a family, but you're having a different experience.
Yeah, than your sister. Yeah. And I thankfully found tennis when I was probably 11, which I was very unathletic in most of the typical boys' sports, soccer, basketball, those sort of things. But things that involved hand-eye coordination, I was quite good at. And I picked up tennis very quickly. Tennis became a real passion for me when I was about 12. And ultimately that became a focus of mine and certainly helped me get into college. But I was kind of a middle of the pack student. I wasn't even top 50 in my class of 200 kids in high school.
Wow. I
had a really hard time in high school. It was a complete miracle fluke that I got into Penn. And
hard time, I mean, you weren't the average 16 or 17-year-old. You were having your own thoughts, and it wasn't what the average kid was thinking. You weren't the average 17-year-old.
I was able to fit in, but I was always a bit weird.
Yeah.
And I always felt like I was from a different planet and didn't really know why I was here and what I was supposed to do. And I always felt this kind of deep urge or ache that there was something more for me. And I got to Penn, and long story for another time, but I had dislocated my shoulder at the end of my junior year of high school, which made tennis a lot harder. And I was quasi-recruited to play at Penn. I probably would have played, 6th on the tennis team. I wouldn't have been particularly high. And I decided to switch to squash when I got to Penn, which was totally insane. Another long story, but basically there was a kid on my hallway who wanted to hit some squash balls with me. And I didn't really know how to play squash. I'd only played a couple times. And we went out and we played, and and he didn't beat me that badly. And I had so much fun. And at that point, I was so burnt out from tennis. And I said to him, I said, do you think I could try out for the squash team? And he looked at me like I was nuts. And he goes, what do you mean? Like, Penn's a top 5 in the nation squash team. Like, you can't just like walk onto the squash program. And one of the positive things that I've always had, even when I was in some of my real challenging periods, was I've always had what they called with Steve Jobs a reality distortion field. Like, I never accepted what people told me. I always thought whatever was impossible was possible. And I never took no for an answer, which is a very good attribute for an entrepreneur. And I went up to the squash coach and I said to him, I said, hey, I'm a tennis recruit. I'm not a squash player. I'm in really good shape. Is there any chance you'll let me try out? And the coach at the time turned out to be one of my greatest mentors. He said, I like your attitude. If you can make it through our preseason, I'll save you a spot maybe on the JV part of our team. They had 20 people on the team. The top 10 were varsity. The bottom 10 were JV. And the preseason tryouts were a war of attrition. It was basically just weed out as many people who didn't want to be there.
Of course.
And I was so determined. And I got the last spot. And so that's how I first got on to squash, which was, everyone around me told me that picking up a new varsity sport at a Division I school
that you had no skill in,
which you had no basis
before,
in,
makes no sense.
And I was so blessed to be a Penn in the first place. And now I wanted to see if I could actually do well at this new school. It seemed, looking back on it, it seems absolutely insane in retrospect that I chose to take on something that was going to be 3 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week as an additional activity. But what I found was I loved the challenge. I loved the camaraderie of the team. And there was something about forcing yourself to organize your day, because I didn't have the option to party all the time. I didn't have the option to just kind of sit around and just shoot the shit with people. Like, I had 3 hours of squash a day. So I had to organize my schedule around that. And it really taught me some life skills about diligence, organization, a lot of things that I did not have in high school. And I had this really fluky thing happen to me when I got to college. And I don't fully know what it was. I mean, looking back on it, it felt a bit divine. But it was as if my brain turned on. And I had all of the ADHD difficulties I had in high school, inability to focus, inability to read long lengths of things. It all flipped when I got to college. And it literally felt like I could like read anything. And it felt like everything I was reading, I could remember. Wow. And it was odd. And I ended up, I went to Penn actually pre-med. I always wanted to be a doctor. Growing up, I was fascinated with anatomy and physiology and biology. And but Penn also had the Wharton School, which is the best undergraduate business school in the country. And I had my first experience at Penn was in an econ class that I really wasn't supposed to take, but I had to take it because of my athletic schedule. And I ended up doing incredibly well in that class. And when I realized how well I could do if I applied myself, I felt like I was having a fresh start. And I had this light switch go off in my brain that basically said, you know what, all that shit in the past, you know, my whole life, people called me an underachiever. They called me a slouch. They called me lazy.
Wow.
All of that like chip on the shoulder stuff. I finally felt like I can remake myself and my brain's working now. And so let's push it and see how far I can go with this, and let's see what can happen.
You had some proving to do.
Yeah. I had a lot of deep insecurity and rage and revenge feelings of everyone, you know, talking down to me. And it wasn't coming from a good place, to be clear. Like, what was fueling me was not from a good place. And that's why we called who I became Terminator.
I was going to say, hence the name Terminator.
Yeah, it wasn't coming from a good place. And I tell this story as a cautionary tale because a lot of what I was able to accomplish, a lot of overachieving type A people look at my ascent as something that they want to emulate. And there were a lot of costs to the way I was doing it. And so what happened was I had this sort of meteoric 4 years in college. I did extremely well academically. I became an academic All-American and All-Ivy, and I won all the awards that you could win in college. I won, there were a variety of best student athlete, all this stuff. And I became obsessed with just winning and accomplishing. And some of it was what I would call domination. And it was, and it felt good at the time. And I always wanted to be rich. And I had associated growing up money with happiness and money with power.
Power, for sure.
And I grew up in a climate where my father was in business. And, you know, I grew up watching movies like Wall Street and worshiping people like Gordon Gekko. Yeah. And I was in, you know, the epicenter of this at Wharton, which is where you could actually turn those dreams into a reality. And I got a coveted job to go to a hedge fund straight out of college, which was extremely unusual. And at the time, I didn't really know what a hedge fund was. This was in 1998. Yeah. And there were only a handful of hedge funds in 1998. But what I knew is I didn't want to do investment banking. I knew I was entrepreneurial. I was very good at math and statistics, which was my training, was in math and statistics and economics. And I ended up going to this firm that was very loose in terms of the owner.
They made a very famous HBO series around that, correct?
Well, no, that was my second job.
That's your second one?
Yeah,
okay.
My first one was with a lovely man who ended up being also one of my greatest mentors, who gave me a shocking amount of responsibility as a 21-year-old. Wow. And I took all the rope he could hand me, and I was far more successful financially than I ever dreamed of in my first 2 years.
Wow.
They made me the youngest partner in history at the firm when I was 23. 23.
To be a partner in a hedge fund, that's insane.
And at the same time, I started getting really sick. And this is where the cautionary part of the tale comes in. And I remember I started developing all these skin lesions and plaques all over my body. My hair was falling out in clumps. I'd be in the shower and I'd have a handful of hair. Like a person on chemo.
Yeah.
And I kind of ignored it because work was going so well and everything to me was work, success. And then I started losing my vision. And when that started happening,
you paid attention.
I started seeing double out of my left eye. Whew. I had a hard time reading. I ended up going to a bunch of doctors. And I ended up finding some very, very prominent ophthalmologists where I was then diagnosed with a degenerative eye disease called keratoconus, for which there's no cure. And the rate of progression of my eye disease was so extreme that they said I would be fully blind by the age of 30. And wow. And I had already it had gotten bad enough by the time I really was addressing it that when I was reading, I had to wear an eye patch because I couldn't read. I mean, it was really bad. It was debilitating.
You were getting double vision.
Yeah, it was debilitating.
Yeah. Wow.
And I normally wear contacts. I couldn't wear contacts anymore, so I had to wear glasses with an eye patch at some point. And I was so ashamed of what I was feeling because on the outside, I wanted to project strength. I wanted to project, like, look what I'm doing.
Wall Street, 23 years old, partner, the whole thing.
And I didn't tell anybody how bad it was. I didn't even tell my parents. I told them I was seeing lots of doctors and I would tell them I was having some issues, but I downplayed it all and I buried it. And the doctor told me that I had to put my name on a corneal transplant list, which was 50-50 at best, whether it would actually stop the blindness. It may not work. Now it works, but back then it didn't. And I was deeply depressed, and I didn't talk about it, and I was very alone. And I had this this thought that would keep coming to me, which I have historically described as naive optimism, which was, maybe you can cure this. And the doctors all told me it was incurable. And I thought, well, I had an episode in college where I had some of those skin plaques from when I was being hazed in my fraternity, and I was subjected to no sleep, and we were forced to drink beer for 3 days straight without eating food.
That was my life. I think we had dog food.
Yeah.
So I know what you're talking about.
And I sort of thought, like, maybe the root cause of this is actually food, and maybe it's food and lifestyle. And I proposed this hypothesis to my ophthalmologist, and he said, that's crazy. He's like, there's no cure for this disease. It's degenerative. Like, stop trying, kid. Like,
right.
Just deal.
Accept your fate.
Accept your fate. And I was never someone who accepted my fate. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to follow my instincts, and I'm going to start reading as much as I can. And back then, now this is 2001, where there's not much on the internet about any of this stuff. Functional medicine didn't really exist yet. There was some doctors who had started writing about the precursors of functional medicine, like Dr. Andrew Weil. Mm-hmm. Mark Hyman was just starting to come onto the scene. And I also was studying and reading about indigenous populations, hunter-gatherer types, because they don't have any of our modern diseases. They don't have, and this was then, and now it's even more pronounced, but they don't have autism. They don't have ADHD. They don't have allergies. They don't have diabetes. They don't have chronic disease, heart disease like we do. And so I started connecting some dots around the root causes of disease. So what was so surprising to me was I was this pillar of health 2 years earlier, and now I'm literally dying 2 years later and going blind, and no one can explain what's happening to me.
While you're carrying a job, which I'm sure was a lot of stress, just the hours. I mean,
oh my God,
that is a boiler room pressure. So you're in the middle of everything. You're in the middle of probably lack of sleep, high stress pressure, and you don't want to let people know on top of it. So,
Correct.
And you got to read screens with one. I mean, all the stuff, compensation you need to do.
Yeah.
Just to not let your secret out of what's going on.
That's right. Yeah, it was a very hard battle at the time. And I decided that I was going to do a very restricted diet. I was going to give up a lot of things that I loved. At the time, I was drinking a bunch of caffeine every morning. I was eating relatively crappy for lunch and snacks. And then I was a single 23-year-old in New York City. So we were going out 3-4 nights a week with the boys or on dates and drinking alcohol. And I decided I was going to give up caffeine. I was going to give up alcohol.
Wow.
Which was, back then, you were very weird.
Oh, yeah.
In New York City, as a single 23-year-old, if you go out to a bar and you're not drinking,
right.
I mean, talk about pressure.
Right.
That, of all, when people ask me, like, what was the hardest thing to give up? And they were expecting me to say things like sugar or gluten. The hardest thing socially then was alcohol.
I still think it is. I'm trying to give up alcohol now, and it's hard to do. I'm always been invited to wine tastings or this. You're at dinner, and wine doesn't really agree with me these days.
No, I can't.
But I realize the social pressure even today, that how much of our lives go around liquor and wine and drinks and celebrations.
Yeah.
So,
anyways. I was publicly shamed all the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was really hard because, a bunch of guys being like, what's wrong with you? Like, have a drink, have a drink.
But don't be a pussy.
Yeah.
Have a drink.
Yeah.
Come on, chug one.
Right. It was hard.
Come on, Karp, you can do it.
It was really hard. And I started doing this whole protocol that I had come up with myself. And after a couple of weeks, I noticed my skin plaques and kind of eczema and psoriasis was going away. And I started noticing that my vision was a little bit better. And I thought, maybe this is working. And I had to check in with my ophthalmologist, and I told him, and he said, that's hogwash. There's no way it's working. Very condescending prick.
Isn't it great having doctors like affirming with confidence that you're going downhill?
Complete condescension and arrogance. And I said, you know what? I'm starting to feel better. I'm just going to keep doing it. And a few months go by, and all my skin stuff's gone. My hair isn't falling out anymore. I look noticeably better. And my vision, I would say, was 50% better.
It's big.
Big. I didn't need the eye patch anymore. Wow. And I did this for many months. And it felt like I was completely back and I could see clearly and I didn't need anything. And I went in to the doctor and I said, give me the test. And thankfully there's an objective test for this disease because he wasn't going to believe me. And the test basically shows if you have the disease or if you don't have the disease. It's objective, black and white.
Right.
And I showed up as negative. And the look on this doctor's face was like he saw a ghost. And he specialized in this disease. So he sees these all the time. And he called in his colleague and he said, you got to come look at this. And they're like looking at the output. And I overhear him. He's whispering. He's like a few feet behind me. I remember it like yesterday. And he goes, maybe we misdiagnosed him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the other guy goes, that's impossible. Like that. And then he comes up to me. He goes, what did you do? And I told him what I did. And he goes, nah, we misdiagnosed you.
Of course.
Yep. And I walked out of that office. And that's one of those rare moments that everyone has in their life when you're like, my life is forever changed. I am going to be a completely different person from here on in. And I had this like huge awakening that part of my role is to help others and to help others realize that you have a lot more control over your own health than you realize. Western medicine dogma is generally not always right, and that you shouldn't always listen to Western medicine doctors on things that instinctually feel wrong. And that I felt like I was a canary in the coal mine where I had gotten quickly, but I could look around and see that everyone was starting to get sick and sicker.
Well, I have my story, which I got hit with toxic mold. The doctors didn't even recognize toxic mold as a disease.
Yep.
But I had arthritis, my entire body. All of a sudden, I had arthritis everywhere, and I had chronic fatigue. I couldn't keep my energy up. And like all they basically wanted to do for me is said, you're screwed. You have non-specified arthritis, basically, and we're going to put you on methotrexate, which was a cancer drug, which is basically anti-inflammatory. And they said, you're going to need this for the rest of your life. You're just going to be managing a condition. So very much like you, the medical establishment told me I was sick. I was never going to get better, but they were going to give me pills to manage my condition. And ironically, if I would have taken that pill, by the way, it suppresses your autoimmune system so it doesn't fire to tell you that you're in pain. So it keeps the arthritis at bay.
Yep.
But it makes the fire rage worse. You're not dealing with the root problem. And I thank God very much like you. And so I found one doctor here, very lucky in town, who we both know is a friend of ours.
Yep.
She was the only one. She was the only one who looked at me and says, I can get you better. She's like, you're going to, and she didn't say that. She said, you're going to heal from this. And I cried. I fucking cried. I was like, no, every doctor is telling me how they're just going to manage me and that I'm just going to be sick and less than diseased.
Yeah.
And so that psychology of just being told by Western medicine that you're sick and we can't heal you. And of course, the system is to keep you through the system. So I'm sure you look around, you see that. It's really bad. It's not only getting sick. Now you're managing a condition for a long time.
Yeah. And this, by the way, when I finally healed myself, it's 2002 now. So we're talking 22 years ago.
You had no resources back then. There was none of that.
And unfortunately, things are so much worse now than they were then for humans.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
But I felt like I had a new lease on life. And I also realized that I didn't fully register it, but a month after I officially healed myself was when I met Jessica.
Wow.
1 month. Yep.
Wow.
Yep. My official healing was, call it April, May of 2002. And I met Jessica in June of 2002.
Wow.
My wife.
Yeah.
And
that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I told her this whole story on our first date. She thought I was a crazy person.
Oh, I'm sure. I'm surprised she took a second date with you.
It's bizarre that she actually, and I actually had the maturity to realize that even though no doctor was able to tell me this, instinctively I had the maturity to realize that part of my episode of how I got so sick was self-inflicted from my insane overachievement, nonstop workaholism. And I think my body basically reacted in a way to warn me, like, this is not the way to live. This is not how you should live. And I felt like I was this super overachiever at the time before I got sick who could do anything. And I was proving in terms of materialistic outcomes that I could do anything, but I was living in complete odds with the way humans thrive. And part of the reason that my courtship with Jessica went so well and why we ended up getting engaged a year and change later, and we married 2 years later, was I also recognized that I needed to bring some balance into my life, and that I suspected. So my overachieving mind was saying, you know what, if you get married, and we got married young. Jessica was 25, I was 28.
Yeah.
And my overachieving mind was saying, like, you shouldn't get married yet. You have so much more to do. Like, it's going to slow you down. But there was a voice inside of me that said, this will actually balance you out. Like, you actually may be more successful if you actually can bring some balance into your life, because that insane, like, single lane, myopic overachievement at any cost is going to kill you. And I ended up continuing in the hedge fund career.
Well, I want to point something out too. You were kind of considered a wonder kid. Very few people in their 20s are partners. And again, I know the second firm you worked for was like a big deal. Then you opened up your own firm as well. $4.5 billion, I think you said, under management. And this is all happening in your late 20s, early 30s,
Yep.
which is unheard of. So now you have the pressure. And I found this because coming from Hollywood, the worst thing you can do is start to buy your own press, right? Because everyone's probably kissing up to you. You're a wonder kid. You're in the press. Every time you take a meeting, they kind of like, you can kind of build that story. And if you get lost in your own story of how other people see you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the fact that you had the wisdom as you're making more money and probably growing your business more and starting things that people just don't do at your age.
Yeah.
The fact that there was some inner wisdom in you, maybe it was the disease that gave you the miracle of that wisdom, because I don't think most people would have ever figured that out on your trajectory, quite frankly.
It was a disease. And I think, I mean, medically speaking, I am a living miracle.
Yeah, you
like
are.
If you Google my eye disease, it still says it's incurable. And I'm like one of the only cases they've ever seen to someone who had it that bad to fully reverse it, and it's still not there. It's gone. And when I even go to ophthalmologists today and I tell them I had keratoconus, they're like, what do you mean you had it? Like, it's a degenerative disease, And so I felt like coming out of that, I did have some inner wisdom, but not a lot.
Enough to get you married to an amazing woman, by the way.
The inner wisdom to get married young to my soulmate, that was inner wisdom. But I still had all those demons fueling me. And I was buying my own press for many years after that.
Yeah.
Because my financial success continued.
Yeah.
And I parlayed that into a second job where I worked for Steve Cohn at what used to be called SAC and now is called Point 72.
Which the show Billions on HBO was based on.
Yeah, the show Billions is based on that firm.
Yeah.
And
you were there during that time.
And actually the era from when I was there.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And you were also a young kid kind of, you've told me, kind of managing chaos, like very much like the
oh my God, yeah.
series.
I can't actually watch the show. I've only watched one episode because it gives me PTSD to watch it.
Wow. So you some of that felt like, wow, that actually happened.
There's aspects of the show that are obviously apocryphal and exaggerated, but there's aspects of the show that are quite real. And around 2009, my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, who I had shown and explained a lot of the way I was living and gave him the books that I had read to heal myself.
And you're continuing to live this lifestyle.
Yes.
You're gluten-free. You're doing the paleo. You're on this track. You knew not to stop. You're like, I don't want that to come back.
I was living what you would kind of call a modified paleo lifestyle. Some people call it an ancestral diet, which is basically eating in a way that's much more consistent with how we've evolved as humans. Which we can get to.
Okay.
It's not as like weird sounding as like the caveman diet. It's really simple, which is like, don't eat anything that didn't exist 200 years ago.
I love it.
Right?
Pretty simple.
Like, if your great-great-grandmother didn't cook with it, don't eat it. And so it's not that complicated, but it's much more about getting back to nature, eating as close to nature as possible with the least amount of processing, with nothing made in a laboratory, with nothing that's synthetic, nothing from chemical corporations, et cetera.
Now I know where your tagline came from Hugh, but we'll talk about that.
Yes, yeah. And
Getting
then
back to human.
That's right. No, that's right. And anyway, my brother-in-law started adopting these lifestyles strategies, and he's like, wow, this is amazing. I can't believe how well I look and I feel and I perform now, and everyone should do this. This is incredible. But there's nowhere to eat like this in New York City. He goes, we should make a restaurant that's the manifestation of all these principles. And I'm like, dude, I'm a professional investor. Restaurants are terrible businesses. We don't know anything about restaurants. No chance. And I got to give it to him, over a lot of hassle and harassment. He convinced me to do this out of passion, because I did need a place to eat.
Yeah, it's for you. It's your place to eat.
It was kind of selfish, and we wanted a place that we could eat at,
right.
And we wanted a place that was really embodied these principles. And we, thankfully, we knew what we didn't know. I'd say one of the great things about us, and it was a family effort, it was my wife, Jessica, Jordan, and me, is we were very humble about what we didn't know. We knew we didn't know anything about restaurants, so we hired people who did, and we hired some consultants. We knew what we wanted in the food and what we didn't want in the food, and we had ideas about design and about what we would stand for, and we ended up calling it Hugh, HU, because the foundational principle of the way we were living was that we don't live like humans anymore. And so our slogan was "Get back to human."
Right.
That if we get back to human, we will heal. And the human body has an incredible way of healing itself when you just remove all the modern toxin, poison shit. And we created a fast casual restaurant called Hughs Kitchen. And it was kind of like a paleo-inspired food court. It was not a full-service restaurant. There were different stations you'd go up, and we had a gluten and grain-free bakery. We had an organic coffee and matcha bar where we made smoothies. We had hot food. We had a third-party market section where we sold a lot of our own homemade stuff, and we would feature brands that we liked, kind of like a mini Erewhon we had. Yeah. And then we had prepared foods that you could take out. And the chocolate was an accident. The chocolate was not, it became a big part of the business, but we were experimenting with grain gluten-free cookies and muffins and banana bread. And we wanted to put chocolate chips in those things. And when we looked around for chocolate chips that met our strict guardrails, we couldn't find chocolate chips that didn't have dairy, soy, preservatives, refined white sugar. Yeah. And we had guardrails for the restaurant that were clearly stated. So our whole restaurant was gluten-free, dairy-free, refined sugar-free, and all of our animal products were sourced from either wild animals or pastured animals that were raised consistent with their own natural habitat and natural evolution. And we were also, and this is what made us like batshit crazy looking, we were no seed oil. In 2011.
Wow. My wife has just gone on the seed oil thing. Our house is devoid of seed oils. But that's like, you guys are way ahead of your time.
Yeah. And I think I want to clarify something for your listeners about seed oils, because I think some of it's being taken out of context. It's becoming very hot right now.
It is.
If you took so there's a lot of hypotheses on why seed oils are bad. And it's also very controversial because there's a lot of science that shows they're not bad. And nobody knows what to believe. And the way I break it down is, we could spend 20 minutes on this topic, but if you took a bunch of organic sunflower seeds in your kitchen and you put them in a food processor, and there'd be, in the same way when you grind up nuts, there's oil that comes out, and the sunflower seed oil comes out of that, that's actually okay. So the concept of oil from a seed, if the seed is organic and it's a seed that's not known to be a toxic seed, that's not bad.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. What makes seed oils bad is the way that they're industrially processed for all modern food. When you see seed oil, canola oil, safflower oil, sunflower seed oil, there's something called grapeseed oil. Canola oil is sometimes called rape without the G, R-A-P-E,
Right.
Rapeseed oil. When you see those in any modern food, or you see them in a fryer in a restaurant, those come from an industrial processing that is similar to how they make engine oil. And the way that they have to do that is the way that you can extract, because extracting oil from seeds is very difficult. Like nobody's going to take food processors and constantly, blend them up. Right. So there's a much more efficient way to do it, which involves grinding them quickly using a solvent, which is a petroleum-based solvent like hexane or butane. That's the way you actually extract the oil. The oil is usually old and rancid. And so what they then have to do is they have to deodorize it because it stinks. Wow. And they deodorize it with another chemical that's an industrial chemical. And then it's like this murky, swamp-looking substance. And nobody wants to eat that. And then they bleach it. Right. And they bleach it also with an industrial chemical. And finally, or maybe not finally, but the final point, most of the industrial seed oils are not organic. And so in any large crop where there's a big business, large crops that have big business are the dirtiest crops. So coffee, sugar, any of the seeds, wheat, rice, corn, any of the major crops that are not organic have the highest amount of pesticide, herbicide, and chemical residue because that's where the money is. And there is a huge benefit and advantage to not having like bad batches when you have huge business. And so there's a lot of glyphosate residue, which is the Roundup chemical in this stuff. So the reason why industrial seed oils are bad are how they're made and all the residue of all this other shit that's in them.
So if you get organic for a consumer, if it's organic.
If you get organic hand-pressed.
Organic hand-pressed is what you're looking for.
Hand-pressed sunflower seed oil, that's
you're
fine.
Good.
That's
so you're going
fine.
to spend more for that because it's a lot more labor.
You can't find it. You can't find it. I mean, you'd have to go to a farmer's market.
So what do you do then for oils then? Do you just look for organic or what do you find?
Yeah, so anything that is, I would call it concentrated. So anything that is literally like concentrated. So fruit juices are concentrated, right? Because you're taking a lot of fruit and squeezing it. Coffee is concentrated. Chocolate is concentrated. Any kind of oil, any nut butter, all those things are concentrated because they take a ton of quantity and shrink it down into something that's concentrated. That always needs to be organic because whatever residue, pesticides, contaminants are on all that stuff gets concentrated also.
Gotcha.
So that's why you have to, and so the oils that we use in our businesses that we have, and we had at Hugh, we use avocado oil, organic avocado oil. We use organic olive oil, organic coconut oil. Those are all fine. And we also use beef tallow. Beef tallow, and which is beef fat, and duck fat have been labeled as terrible. But the original way to saute and fry was with tallow and duck fat. You've probably seen duck fat fries at a restaurant.
I have.
Yeah. Those actually aren't that bad for you.
Good. It's good to know.
Yeah. So
I appreciate it.
I digress on seed oils, but
no, it's okay. I think we might do a whole thing on just seed oils. Because you know what? It's actually really interesting and most people don't know. Yeah. So I think it's great.
So we had to make our own chocolate and for the chocolate chips for that part of the restaurant. And we came up with a recipe that was like amazing and we loved it. And we're like, wow, these chocolate chips are amazing. And my brother-in-law said, we should turn these into chocolate bars and we should sell these chocolate bars in our restaurant. And that's how Hugh Chocolate got born.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Chocolate chips into chocolate bars.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Did they take off right away or did it take a minute?
It was pretty quick. I mean, we noticed that a lot of the customers who were coming into the restaurant were buying, and our chocolate bars, which were not that profitable, we were selling them for $10 a piece because it's hard to make handmade chocolate. Yeah. And people were coming in and buying them like 5 at a time. Right. And we would sell out like quickly. And I kind of knew, I could see the data and I'm like, wow, like I think we might have something here. And then we had a lucky break where one of our chefs, his girlfriend worked at Whole Foods and he used to bring her home our chocolate bars. And this was before Amazon owned Whole Foods. And she came in one day and said, these are the best healthy chocolate bars I've ever had. Can we sell them at Whole Foods? but only that Columbus Circle location.
Right.
Because back then they would do what they were called local foragers,
Right.
where they would take local products and put them in one store. They don't do that anymore. And that's how we got into Whole Foods, and that's how it ended up turning into a consumer packaged goods business.
Wow. Jason, were you still working at as all this is going on, are you still working at a hedge fund, or are you still running your own hedge fund at this point?
So the craziest thing about this whole thing is we opened Hughs Kitchen, the restaurant, 2 months before I started managing outside money for my own hedge fund.
Oh my gosh.
So the timing of it was horrific.
So you're like literally raising money.
Yeah, it was timing was not ideal, but my brother-in-law and Jessica ran the restaurant and I was running my hedge fund.
Right.
And fast forward a few years later, we started getting a lot of incredibly positive feedback from certain customers. We'd get letters, we would get emails where people would say things like, I have X and Y illness, I have diabetes, I have this issue. I didn't think I could eat anywhere, and I found your restaurant and you've changed my life. Thank you so much. You know, we even got letters where people said like, I didn't think I could ever eat chocolate again. I can eat your chocolate. Like life-changing messages. And I never got life-changing messages from the hedge fund.
Yeah, I can understand.
You know, I didn't have investors that would write me, you saved my life with your returns.
Wow.
And I just started registering that, and I started registering how good that made me feel, that you could build business that also helped people. And I came up with my own bullshit rationalizations that running hedge fund money, you know, for endowments was a service, which of course it is. And I'm sure the underlying investors of some of these things were widows and orphans. But it's different. It's different when you're just literally pushing paper around and arbitraging money, which is what I was good at. And I did it for, 21 years. It's very different than creating products and services that allow people to live healthier lives and bring them a kind of joy that money can't buy. And that kept building in me. And I started to really feel this ache around 2015, which probably not coincidentally was the peak of my hedge fund. And in that year, I accomplished everything I had ever dreamed in that year. It was one of those years where everything I ever wished for happened in that year.
Yeah. But I did a little research. I remember because as a investor in your fund, I remember looking back and you were killing it. Like your returns were great. You raised more money. Like you were hitting every checkbox of a successful hedge fund.
Yeah.
Which is like unbelievable.
And we won a bunch of awards. We won Best New Hedge Fund of the Year. I won Best Manager of the Year. I won all these like awards and trophies and stuff. And I remember after I won Best New Hedge Fund of the Year, and we were just about to close out on our best year ever. And it was the kind of year where it was like a life-changing amount of money just from that one year. I looked at Jessica and I go, I don't think I can do better than this. And she goes, what do you mean? And I go, I think this is like the top of whatever I can do. Like this is like the Oscars. This is like I won the Oscar, and I've worked like from when I was like 17 years old to this was the end of 2015. So I'm like 37, and I go, I kind of felt like, and this is a phrase I heard from one of my mentors, I felt like I'd climbed to the top of the mountain and there was nothing to see. I spent, 20 years climbing that mountain and there was nothing to see. And I had this just deep, like depression set in, and it was dark. It was real dark. And I didn't tell anybody about it. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? And the money was so big and it was just coming in. And like, because of the management fees and everything, I had a big firm. I had 40 people working for me. And on the one hand, I felt like I have all these people that I'm helping and they're working for me and I have this thriving business. But on the other hand, I was waking up every day thinking like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. Like, I'm not supposed to be doing this. And it took me, and Jessica, to her credit, wanted me to close it.
Wow.
At like the peak. which for anyone who knows fund management businesses, when you're managing $4 billion with a 2% management fee.
My gosh, you can do the math.
Yeah. It is very hard to just be like, I'll just give that back.
Wow.
And I stayed in it for 2.5 more years because I made every justification I could. Like, I still love investing. I love all my people. I love my investors. And all those were true. But my heart started to not be in it. And my returns for the first time started to suffer. And 2016 was the first year I'd ever lost money. I went 18 years in a row making money, which in the hedge fund business is not easy to do.
It's unheard of. I mean, that was one of the reasons why you kept winning best fund manager because of your track record.
And it was like a massive blow to my identity because that's like what everyone thought of me as, is like Jason always makes money. What's going on? Like, what's happening?
From Terminator to Wonder Kid. Or Wonder, whatever.
Yeah. And now I'm falling. And like my world's falling apart. And
you're still in the depression at this point too?
I would say it started getting really bad after my best friend and business partner of 16 years killed himself.
Wow.
And he was like my number two. It's not for this episode to go into what happened, but it destroyed me. And that was when I had to start doing like real deep soul searching. And that was when a lot of what some people call the dark night of the soul, began for me. And I was having night terrors. I wasn't sleeping. I would wake up in the middle of the night with like horrific night terrors. I don't think I slept properly or even remotely for 7 months. And
which probably is scary for you also, because last time you didn't sleep that much, you got this horrible eye disease.
Correct.
So I'm sure in the back of your brain,
it was all sorts of PTSD kicking in.
I bet.
And it was a dark time. Yeah. And what made it even darker was I couldn't talk about it because on the surface, everyone's looking at me like this pinnacle of success. And there were a couple people I attempted to even like drop the hint, like, I'm not doing well. And they would say like, what's wrong with you? You have a good family, you have a lot of money, you're pretty healthy. Like, I wish I was in your position. Like, shut up, And that is something that I want to remove from our culture, that anybody, no matter how fortunate they look on the surface, can be struggling deeply on the inside. And there's people, by the way, who don't have good financial prospects or good health, and they're happy. And
I had a 1 year when Thrive was growing my company.
Yeah.
I'd close the door in the morning and cry because I was going through like my own dark night of the soul of like how to grow this company.
Yeah.
Before I kind of found my mission and what the why was for this company, I'm like, how did I go from being this creative guy to get in, like, now I'm in commercial real estate finance? Like, what could be more boring? And it was really depressing for me. It took me a while to find my way out of that and find purpose and what could have been a very soul-sucking thing. So I relate to what you're saying.
Yeah, and I would just say anybody, and I've helped a bunch of people who are far more successful than I was, who are billionaires, deca-billionaires, who go through their own shit and they're depressed and they have a messed up family life. And like, humans, no matter how much you have, are not immune to the basics of the human condition. And
in some ways it sounds like it could be worse because, to your point, everyone expects you to be happy. God damn it, you have money, you're married, you're hitting all the checkbox of what society expects. Like, you're at the top of this, you have no right to complain.
Correct.
Right?
And that was very alienating and very terrifying. And that's ultimately what led me to do psychedelic guided therapy, which was in 2017. And when that happened, because I was still really struggling, I refused to go on medication. I tried a bunch of the talk therapy methods, and nothing was really working for me. And I'm like, I'm not going on an antidepressant. I learned from my eye disease episode that if there is something that's affecting you, you should try to figure it out without a pill. And I'm not saying there obviously are some medications that are life critical. So I'm not saying that, but there are many, many illnesses that are curable or reversible without a pill. And I learned that, and I refused to go on a pill. And a friend of mine was a survivor in the Mumbai terrorist attacks of 2008 and had terrible PTSD from witnessing like assassinations. And he had found psychedelic therapy as a way to deal with his PTSD. And this was in 2016 for him, when it was still really underground.
Oh, yeah.
It was really considered like, people would call it drugs. And it had a very negative aura or very negative stigma around it. And I was not someone who used drugs. I was like, I always considered myself like a Boy Scout. I mean, I smoked pot a couple times in college.
But you weren't even drinking much alcohol.
No, I wasn't drinking alcohol. And like, I thought all this stuff was like, no. But I was at my wit's end. And I said, you know what? One of my closest friends, he said it saved his life. I'm in the darkest place of my life. I'm going to try it. And it changed my life. And
what was it? MDMA? Is that what you do? What were you doing?
it was psilocybin and MDMA. It was with a wonderful facilitator who has done, thousands of these over 25 years. He had to be incredibly underground because of, the risk of being like caught or busted,
Oh, yeah.
And it had a feeling around it that I felt like I was like committing a crime. And what I was able to experience in that first session was I was able to speak to my deceased best friend and business partner, and repair some of the things that I thought were unsettled. And I blamed myself in part for his death, which was haunting me. And I was able to, if you're not spiritual, it was a beautiful dream. If you are spiritual, I spoke to a spirit. And he said, it's not your fault. I'm in a better place. Go live your life. I got a lot of messaging around my purpose of helping people in that first session. And when I came out of it, my night terrors were gone. Completely.
Wow.
Gone.
Wow.
And they never came back. And I realized that this was such an important modality for humanity, for people who are struggling with capital T trauma, lowercase t trauma, things that are unsettled. I think it's the most incredible form of medicine that exists, if done in a therapeutic, guided, properly dosed, scientific setting.
Set and setting.
Not with your four buddies, for fun. That's a different discussion. And it also really helped crystallize, beginning with that journey, it helped crystallize what I really wanted to do in my life, which is I want to help heal humanity. And I want to help wake up humanity to what's been happening to us. I think we are literally, without hyperbole or exaggeration, I think we are literally extincting ourselves right now. And the data is overwhelming. I've been immersed in health and wellness for 20 years. I've been immersed in the data. I've been on nutrition school boards. I've been involved in policy and government. I've seen a lot. And what I can tell you is it's actually worse than what the media reports. Just some simple statistics. In terms of chronic disease, heart disease, obesity, diabetes, 2023 is the worst it's ever been in recorded history. Roughly 70% of adults are obese or overweight. 90% of adults in America have some form of metabolic disorder. Men's
9 out of 10.
Men's sperm count is down 50% in the last 40 years. Polycystic ovary syndrome, which is the leading cause of infertility in women, 26% of women have that now. 20 years ago, that number was 5%.
I think they used to call it working woman's disease.
1 in 33 kids have autism now. That number, when I was a kid, was 1 in 10,000. And it's not just what's happening with what I call physical health. Mental health is also worst it's ever been. Suicide rates 2023, all-time high for suicide rates was 2023. Loneliness is the #1 predictor of early death, above smoking.
Wow.
Loneliness is the #1 predictor of early death. There was a Yale study that showed that being lonely is equivalent to smoking about 2 packs a day. And then you look at the animals. Vertebrate populations over the last 50 years is down 70%, 70. And then you look at all the fluky, weird weather shit that's been happening. Earthquake in New York, flash floods everywhere. I mean, just you don't even have to like debate global warming. I'm talking about crazy, crazy events, hurricanes, cyclone bombs, flash floods. Unprecedented amounts of this stuff is happening. Stuff that was supposed to be 1 in 100-year storms, 1 in 100-year floods are happening every year now.
My property insurance on all my real estate's up. It's up 400% because of this.
Yeah,
and no one wants to talk. Like that's
no one wants
just
to talk about it.
I mean, that the insurance companies are.
No one wants to talk about
Yeah.
that. This is the greatest existential threat we have, which is that we are extincting ourselves. And if you are a spiritual or a religious person, we are living currently in the beginnings of a slow motion apocalypse. Like what you think of as a biblical apocalypse with like a quick, like Noah's Ark-like flood, we're living in a slow motion version of that right now. And we're asleep, and we're all asleep, and we're all actively poisoning each other, and we're fighting over the stupidest shit.
It's unbelievable how stupid this shit is that we fight over.
It is and companies, and so my big fight. So I created HumanCo as my second company. HumanCo is think of it as a mini conglomerate or a holding company where we are buying brands, building brands, and creating experiences that allow people to live a healthier life with trust and with authenticity. Where anything that I put my stamp on, you don't have to ask who made it, where is it from, what's their motive, because so much of what I learned when I was a public market hedge fund investor, studying all these big food companies, studying all these industrial agricultural companies, studying all these industrial chemical companies, they all are solely judged on their bottom line profit. They're not judged on their stakeholders. They're not judged on their externalities. They're not judged on what happens to the environment or to people. They're judged on, did you make the quarter?
How'd the quarter go?
Are you growing your earnings? And if they don't do that, they get fired. And if the board doesn't force them to do that, the board gets fired. And if the investor who's investing in those companies owns a company that isn't, in terms of its stock price performance, isn't doing as well as something else, and stock price performance is almost entirely correlated to cash flow and profit growth, the investor, the underlying investor who's running that fund at Fidelity, they get fired. And so there's this gigantic misincentive to grow profits at any cost and worry about like, oh, we're poisoning people, we're doing this, we're doing that. If it's not acute poisoning, people don't notice it until 20 years later, which is why we're here. And companies are literally being paid to poison people. And we have to stop this madness.
It's completely extractive. Public markets, I know this is probably a whole other podcast we could do, but I just, as a person who's in private equity, not publics, it just seems like, unfortunately, I don't know. It's the one part of capitalism that sometimes I question, because I get how efficient it is to raise capital, but it just seems like the shareholders are winning. And at what cost are the shareholders winning on many companies? I know, by the way, I think we can talk about this. You sued Kellogg's. Can we talk about that, or is that not?
Yeah. I'm happy to. But I want to add one point before we get to the Kellogg's,
please.
Which is the part that blows people's minds, especially very smart, scientific, educated people. And we can come back to this in terms of like, I think there's a spiritual prescription for how to fix this, which is all those statistics I gave you, which are literally the worst ever in recorded history. And we're
you say, I know life expectancy is even going down right now.
We are the first generation in recorded human history that's expected to live a shorter lifespan than the previous. That's never happened except in war. So all of this is happening at the same time as we exercise more than we ever have. We have more pharmaceuticals than we ever have. We have more medical devices than we've ever had. We have more medical treatments than we've ever had. We have more technology, advanced technology, AI, all this stuff that we think we're like masters of our universe, we are the most advanced, in quotes, we've ever been on all these metrics, and we're the sickest we've ever been. Which, if you are someone who is even remotely rational, yeah. You have to look at that and say, what we're doing with science as it relates to human health is not working. Not only is it not working, we're getting worse. So just shut it off. Like what I call our maps of reality, the way we think like the world works, is wrong. And I think a big part of the reason we're here and why our maps of reality are wrong is that we have lost touch with where we come from. We have lost touch with how we are connected to Mother Earth and how we are connected to nature. We have lost touch with God and spirituality. And we have thought through materialistic science that we are now our own gods. And we are doing stupid shit. Like, let's see what happens if we make meat in a laboratory because we're worried about carbon emissions from cows. So let's make meat in a petri dish and grow it in a bioreactor, and let's measure it our own scientific way, and we can measure it and say, oh, it's identical to meat. There's a lot of stuff we don't know, and humans have massive hubris in thinking that our science is going to like solve everything. And there have been countless occasions in the last 100 years where we did something where we thought it was fine, and then 20 years later we're like, oh wait, like maybe we were wrong.
There's a thousand examples.
Asbestos was one of them that thought cigarettes, thalidomide,
TV dinners,
Olestra. Like you could go down the list.
How about Ozempic, which they haven't talked about yet?
Ozempic's going to be a disaster.
Yeah,
and so we have to have a lot more reverence as it relates to human health. There's a lot of things we can't explain about how the human body works and about human health. Like the loneliness example I gave you. Loneliness is the best predictor of early death. There's not a pill for loneliness, right? You got to get back together with people, right? And
I mean, it means you can't fight about if you're on the red team or the blue team. You got to just like...
No, there's certain things that are actually...
Which flag, the red flag or the blue flag? You got to get over that
There's
shit.
certain things that are actually easy, but they're annoying. And I think a lot of people don't want to think about it and deal with it. And I think spirituality and a respect for our connection to Mother Earth will bring us back to health. And I come back to the indigenous people that I studied, who many modern, rich, Western scientist type, if they saw hunter-gatherers living in indigenous communities, they think of them as like heathens. They think of them as like, cavemen. And they don't have any of our diseases. And guess what? They're happier than we are. They might not have like your Tesla, but they figured something out right. And we have to go back to that.
Jason, let me ask you a question, because I love having this conversation with you because you're deeply rooted in investment banking, Wall Street. So you understand how the system is set up more than you've succeeded. You've been the success of that system. But how do we, and I so respect what you're doing, which is, I could not invest with you. I think I told you, I had to vote for what you're doing, because to have your discipline with your ethos of how you want to change it. But how do you change a system? We'll call it big ag. Everyone thinks, how do you change big agriculture and industrial farming, which has been like, how do we change this shareholder wins at any price mentality? How does that not overwhelm you and then give you the energy to fight against that?
So I think there's two ways. I think they have to do it top down, and I think you have to do it bottom up. The top down is working with regulators and policymakers to do things like ban stuff that are known harms to humans that, they might make the product a little cheaper. They might make it a little bit more shelf stable. They might help the industrial process of that thing. But if you take a bunch of the chemicals that are in Kellogg's Fruit Loops, as an example, all the artificial food dyes that are derived from petroleum, they are banned or require cigarette-like warning labels in all of the developed countries except America. Canada, Australia, all of Europe, because they've seen the studies. And the studies show that these are neurotoxic. They affect children's ability to learn. They affect children's behavior. And the FDA in this country is corrupt. They are bought and paid for, and we have a policy that, as Americans, that we use this sort of bullshit cover of it spurs innovation. Of when something is generally recognized as safe, which is a term that's used in the FDA, they permit it. And then they say, it's basically you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's why things like trans fats and Olestra and some of these food things that came and left because now they're carcinogenic, that's why it took 20 years for them to figure that out. In Europe, they have an opposite approach, which is called the precautionary principle, which is with anything they're putting in human bodies, you're guilty until proven innocent. You need to show us 10 years of data that this is, if it's weird and it's not like from the nature, that this could be in our food supply. And they are way healthier than we are. Like way healthier than we are. Spain was just voted like the healthiest country in the world.
Well, you see it when you go to Europe. You see these people are not overweight. You're not seeing a lot of heavy people and all the things that go along with it.
Yeah, and guess what? They eat bread, they eat cheese, they eat milk,
they do.
They eat fried food. It's not like they're eating salads all day.
No.
They don't have the chemical burden that we do. And so the first thing is, if I had a wave of a magic wand, and this is what RFK wants to do, I would eliminate all conflict of interest with all the agencies. All the agencies, the FDA, the USDA, the CDC, they all have substantial conflicts of interest and funding from public corporations. I would eliminate all of that immediately, like day one. Anything that is banned in 20 or more developed countries, banned. I would instantly ban it here and just say, like, we don't need to debate this, guys. Like, all these other countries that have developed governments, that have developed like educational systems, like they're probably not stupid.
And by the way, that was your Kellogg's lawsuit. That you're like, Kellogg's actually changes the ingredients for the companies where it's banned. They know.
Kellogg sells a safer version in Canada
than they do in America.
They make it in America and sell it up in Canada, and then they give our children the shittier
stuff,
the toxic version,
because it's cheaper.
Because it's 5 cents cheaper a box. And this is the kind of stuff that if there were a handful of politicians that didn't care about the corporations bribing them through their lobbying efforts, and all they cared about was the future of humanity, they would say, like, enough. I don't care that the food's going to be 10 cents more. We're not poisoning you. You shouldn't have to spend more money to not be poisoned in this country. I mean, think about that. You have to spend more money to not be poisoned in this country.
Absolutely.
And that is a travesty for all populations. And so the top down is regulation. And a lot of people like wince at regulation. They're like, oh, I don't want to be controlled. This is just simple safety. This is not a partisan issue. You should not have to debate that corporations should not have the incentive to use something that makes their products more profitable, but also poisons you. Right. That shouldn't be allowed.
I love the top European approach, the top up approach.
Yeah,
give you guilty until proven innocent versus like.
Yeah, and by the way, we don't even have to be that controversial around it. Like if it's already banned in all these countries, like just trust it. Just trust it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the bottom up part of it, which is really powerful, but it takes a lot longer, which is the invisible hand of what the consumers ask for. If I could find a very, very influential person, celebrity, who would come out and say, hey, everybody, don't buy Fruit Loops or any of Kellogg's products in the US until they use the safer ingredients that they're already using in Canada, Australia, England, et cetera. Overnight, if Kellogg's sales drop 5%,
they would do it.
They would change it overnight.
Overnight.
It's kind of like what happened with Bud Light.
Right.
Now that's obviously a different political issue.
Right.
But if these companies saw that they were not being rewarded for poisoning people, they would change. And they're not changing out of benevolence. They're changing because they're trying to do well with business.
Correct.
And so I'm not holding out hope that all these board members who are profiteering, corrupt people, I'm not holding out that they're going to all of a sudden gain a conscience overnight. I am holding out that if consumers stop buying that shit, it will change. And we've seen it in a bunch of categories. Like the most recent one that was really stark was grass-fed milk. Grass-fed milk from cows that are pastured and fed only grass, which are what cows are meant to eat. Cows are not meant to eat corn. 15 years ago, when I started drinking grass-fed milk, it was only in farmers markets. You couldn't find it. And it was 400% the price of conventional milk. Something happened, I don't know what, over the last 15 years where people started acknowledging that grass-fed milk is healthier, it tastes better, it's better for animals, it's better for you, yada, yada. Every single grocery store today sells grass-fed milk now, including HEB and Walmart.
Organic was
organic.
the same thing. Organic was like the small granola stores in Los Angeles. I mean, now look at it. I mean, it's totally changed.
All the farmers could see that there's a business there. And now grass-fed milk, if you go to a Walmart, is like 30, 40% more, not 400% more. And so this can happen. But it's inconvenient and it's annoying because people are used to just doing their routines and people are asleep. And until you get sick or until you know someone that gets sick, it's really hard to change.
I noticed, by the way, Jason, in some of your products, you are using celebrities. If I recollect, it's Cindy Crawford, Justin Bieber's wife, Jessica Bieber?
Haley Bieber.
I'm sorry, Haley Bieber.
Yeah,
Haley Bieber. So I know a part of your strategy is actually bringing celebrities in to endorse healthy products as opposed to Tony the Tiger and doing that. So it's interesting. So I think from what you've told me, like that strategy for you is like literally it's time that we start giving healthier products that are better for you the place where they need to shine naturally. So it's almost like using promotion for good rather than promotion for bad.
Yeah. I mean, look, there are a handful of celebrities, athletes, influencers who genuinely care about humanity, about leaving this place better than how we found it. And those people can use their voice as a force for good because all the same marketing tactics that got me to eat all that junk food in the 90s, they also work for healthy stuff too.
Right.
And I think...
I love that. Like that's so cool that you're...
And I think we have to make healthier food cool. And I think we have to demonize, and I use that word seriously, I think we have to demonize the toxic food and put the amount of negative energy around it that was around cigarettes, because it's actually more toxic than
It's time
cigarettes.
to shame these people.
It's more toxic, and if
which was the point of your Kellogg's lawsuit?
Yeah.
It was to bring it. It was to bring
it into light and to say enough. Like when I wrote that letter, the number of moms who wrote me direct messages or emails, they said, I had no idea. I had no idea there was a healthier version of Fruit Loops. I had no idea that they were poisoning me with this stuff.
What about the sunscreens that we use? Well, that's a whole other story.
I mean, there's everything.
It's all over the place.
It's everything. It's everything.
It's the same strategy though, all over, no matter what it is.
Yeah. So I do have hope, but I think it will take a village. I think it's going to take a lot of people waking up and being more intentional about their consumption choices, because ultimately the consumption patterns will drive what happens at these companies.
Yeah. You know, Jason, just to end this is, by the way, I am not only just so enjoying this conversation with you, I've been wanting to have this conversation with you for like probably since we met at TED, to sit down with you, because I know these things about you, but to actually you're filling a lot of the dots for me personally, and that's great. So, you know, words come up a bunch of times, to become conscious, to become aware. And it seems like if you think about from the conversations we've had, it really goes within everything. When we talk about where is AI going to take us? Where's big ag going to take us? Where are we going to wind up as a society? We both have a mutual friend who's working on loneliness right now with something that could be super cool for loneliness. I think what you and I share in common, Jason, a lot of things we share in common, but it's this idea that helping people wake up. Like, can we effectuate? Can we be servant leaders, which is part of what this podcast is about?
Yeah.
To wake people up.
Yeah.
Can purpose-driven businesses can create outsized returns by being awake, by being conscious with what you're serving, not just your investors, not just your shareholders, not just your net worth goals, because you got to show who you are in the world and take your kids on a nice vacation. You know, like what's bigger than that? And I can, time and time again on my episodes and from my own life, my happiness is not derived from any of those things. My happiness comes from serving others. We are built for community. We are built to serve.
We are.
And I really feel like I'm just astounded, amazed, and humbled and honored to be friends with you, because I know you're taking a stab at a really, really hard problem and taking the gifts that have been given to you. Not just the money I'm not talking about, just also the skills, the awareness of, you know the game because you played the game.
Yeah.
Who couldn't be a better player to fight against a system than the guy who's won in the system, and now it's like you're using it for good?
Yeah.
I mean, how many stories do you hear like that? It's just like amazing.
Thank you, JP. I really appreciate it. What I'll say, though, maybe is some inspiration to your listeners, is it's also very hard because the incumbents are not going down without a fight. And I get a lot of heat. And the more people that are doing things that are making humanity and the planet better, the more of us, the easier that fight will become. And I truly feel in the last year, the tide is turning. And you're starting to see more national conversation around this stuff. And I think the connection to spirituality is that if you acknowledge that life is this beautiful creation and that what we have in Mother Earth is indescribably incredible and amazing, and you realize that there's something bigger than us and that we have a duty to protect what we've come from, it's much easier to do this than just thinking like, I'm just this random ball of flesh that came out of complete randomness and I'm just going to die.
Right. And I'm here to get my own, take care of a family, get married, check the box, do this, and then it's all over. Like, yeah, that's it's an unsustainable model as we've learned. Hey, I want you to think about, for the listeners, because we've gone everywhere, and I love that we have, by the way. I had no idea what to expect. This is awesome. Any books or resources or links for people to wake up, everywhere from inspirational business stories to food resources? Can you think of them, or maybe we'll post them if it's something you need some time to think about? Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of different topics that we covered.
How about on food? If somebody wants to wake up to a better diet, what would you... Are there easy resources or stores or things you'd say to help people wake up to diet?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's a handful of authors who've written really good books. Callie and Casey Means just wrote a great book called Good Energy. Dr. Mark Hyman has written many books on functional medicine and diets that heal. I would say that some of the biohacking movement has overcomplicated this and made it like you have to do all of these weird things every day to be healthy.
Oh my gosh, it's overdone.
90% of getting really healthy is super simple stuff that you could have done 100 years ago, which is
let thy food be thy medicine.
Sleeping 7.5 hours or more a day, getting daily sunlight, making sure you have love around you, making sure you have community, making sure you're not sitting all day, making sure you're not eating things from a laboratory, making sure you have some stress management practices like meditation or mindfulness. Like, that's not that complicated. That'll get you 90% of the way there, especially if you remove things that are made in laboratories and moving back towards things that are as close to the earth as possible, whether it's plants or animals.
Jason, thank you beyond. I'm blown away. I'm I'm so appreciative and just love this conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, JP.
Yeah. Hey, I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Jason. I don't think there's any other person in the world that you'll ever hear that story or what he's doing for America on behalf of you and I. And I hope not only did you get educated from that in terms of what products you buy, but hopefully also it inspires you to just remember that always following to doing the right thing and what your gut tells you can absolutely lead to outsized results. We keep proving it time and time again. Hey, if you like the episode, follow Jason Karp, and of course, follow us on Instagram, YouTube. It's been great. Our show keeps growing organically, and it's really been for people like you referring me one person at a time, and I just love our audience. We always love your comments. Remember, you can find us at Investing on Purpose with any comments, all the major social media brands, and we'll see you on the next episode. We got some great ones coming up.